9th, Governor Maura Healey signed into law an act making appropriations for the fiscal year 2023 to provide for supplemental certain existing appropriations and for certain other activities and projects. This act included an extension until March 31st, 2025 of the remote meeting provisions. This meeting of the Long Range Financial Planning Committee will be conducted via remote means. And with that, I'm going to basically say we're recording the meeting through Zoom. And I'm going to jump into the agenda. And I'll begin with the chair's update. So I don't know, I know you all have lots going on in your lives. I don't know if you're able to watch all of the other sort of related meetings, but there have been a number of financial updates that I wanted to just bring to this group's attention in case you missed either the last couple of select board meetings or the last FinCom meeting. Back at our August 14th meeting, the select board authorized Chief Deckers to utilize approximately $400,000 in additional overtime to take the 24/7 staffing to 9 firefighters. Now, just a point of clarification, at the most recent FinCom meeting, there was a misstatement that we had provided approval to go to 11 firefighters 24/7. That was just, it was inaccurate, just a misstatement because there were a lot of other conversations about getting to 11 in the future. So we've only approved funding for 9 that was 24/7, and we're exploring ways to get to the recommended level of 11, but that's an ongoing process as part of the budget planning. Yesterday, we had a visit from Norfolk County Commissioners to present a ceremonial check of just over $1.5 million, representing what Westwood has received to date in reimbursements for the qualified project expenses that have been submitted. We were given some real nice accolades from the commissioners in terms of being on top of this and really finding good uses for this money. They said not every municipality is nearly as on top of it as we are. So thank you to Chris and Stephanie for that. And then additionally, at our August 28th meeting, when we're talking about ARPA funds, the select board authorized an additional amount of just over $1 million to be moved from the restricted ARPA funds to the Pine Hill School project for the HVAC. Now, I had a conflict, could not be at last night's PBC meeting, so I may turn to Nancy to provide a latest update on the roof-mounted solar array. I believe that was voted by the board last night. And the benefit of this is that we're able to purchase the PPA and receive energy tax credits, all of which is projected to save the town a little over $3.5 million, $3.3 million, according to what I recall Tom Philbin saying at one of our other meetings. So Nancy, is there anything from last night's PBC meeting to add to that?
No, you're spot on your recollection of the numbers. We approved the necessary step to accept those funds and put them to work, and what it does for generating energy for the project. I see that May is coming in. I think it does about 70% of the necessary usage on the site, but Maya had another quantitative assessment of it that I think would equate to 100% that will be a net zero building.
Yes, basically the panels are generating about 60 to 70% power, which is equivalent, which that the building will use. But when you add in the renewable energy credits that are generated by the solar array as well, then we actually do get to 100%, and the building can be considered net zero. So as I said last night in the SBC PVC meeting, this was sort of a pipe dream at the very beginning of the project when we were talking. We knew we were going to make the roof solar panel ready. But, to actually install panels and to get to net zero was really sort of seemed very far off. So the fact that we're able to do it is just a huge accomplishment. And we are all really, really thrilled. I was very happy to take that vote last night at the meeting. And so this is great news, honestly, for the town. I mean, I think we're generating savings of about $3 million. So it's great news.
That's right. And according to Tom, we will be sort of the model of energy efficiency going forward in terms of school buildings. So that's spectacular. And then if I recall, Chris, we allocated that to the HVAC project because there was a significant, the number in terms of what that represents for the school in terms of project costs, I think was something like $12 million, 7 of which qualified under use for the restricted funds. And so adding this freed up the money that allowed us to make those the solar panel purchase. So just let this group should know that. And so that covers what I had for the chair's update. Next, I believe we have an update from our CPA working group. Nancy, do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah, it's just a continuation of the discussion from the last meeting, but I know we've got we have Phil here who wasn't at that meeting. And I just want to do a quick recap and then tell you what the new information is. So our working group was charged with looking into if CPA adoption, the Community Preservation Act adoption, would be beneficial in the context of Hale and the discussion that Hale is having with the town regarding conservation restriction of land located in Westwood. Simultaneously, they're having a discussion with Dover about the land Hale has in Dover. And we quickly learned that the timing and the steps necessary for adoption of CPA would not be conducive to Hale's request with the town, which is under active consideration, but not yet before the voters. So it's still in I don't want to say planning stage, but it hasn't made it to the forefront with what the terms would be. We as a group concluded the timing for adoption of CPA didn't work, but we also looked at, should CPA be considered in spite of that conclusion of it not having alignment with Hale as an anchor project. And we took a dive into that, and the town has looked into this before. We've had prior votes that failed in terms of the town adopting CPA. And since our last meeting, we actually met with the communications director of the Community Preservation Act Coalition and had a very good discussion and learned more details surrounding why now is a good time for communities who haven't yet adopted CPA to consider it. And the primary reason is the steps necessary for a town meeting vote leading up to a ballot vote align very well with the presidential election next year, where history shows that there's been a greater success rate in adoption of CPA when it comes to the ballot vote piece of this, I'll call it a transaction, but this adoption. That bodes well for any communities considering it. And we have just been looking into the process and what would be involved. But really, I think the bottom line question that is left to be answered is, for what purposes would we as a community want to adopt the Community Preservation Act? It's called a surcharge on our tax bills. Any community that has it, it's called a surcharge, which equates to added taxation. So I'm just going to put a sidebar comment here on my own, looking at the 5-year capital plan elements and the discussions the town's having regarding the main fire station, other school building projects. The large projects that the town is now talking about do not qualify for the use of CPA funds.
And just for clarification for anybody who may be watching and hasn't tuned into prior meetings, there's really 4 categories that CPA can be used for, correct?
Correct.
There's open space, housing, historical, and recreation. Those are the 4, correct?
Those are the 4 categories.
I think town council has his hand up for a moment. Let's get to his question, and then we'll come back to
Nancy. Is the success rate at the presidential election on the basis of turnout?
I believe so. I mean, somebody may have heard them say that.
Makes sense, because we vote 90 to 95%.
Correct.
Voters turn out for a presidential election where it diminishes from there based on other elections.
Yeah, it's interesting though to contrast that with what we were told is in order to be successful, it really requires a very active campaign. So it's important to be able to say what projects the town would use CPA funds for, giving examples, not a be all end all list, but giving examples so that voters are informed, educated. I find that interesting at a time when there's sort of the fire hose of different things that voters have to make decisions on. But their information indicates that that happens to be advantageous timing. They also indicate that a surcharge of 1 to 1.5% is the sweet spot. That rarely have communities been successful shooting for the full 3% that's allowed. And taking a step back to Rob's comment about the categories, the memo that we put together as a group for this committee this working group that hopefully others have read, it really was CPA was designed for quality of life projects so that the community benefits from the projects that would be eligible for funding by CPA. So it really comes down to that, Rob, and what the select board's thinking in terms of capital projects as to whether or not this would make sense for the town to pursue.
Right, and then just one other clarification for the benefit of those who haven't been here or just tuning into this conversation. CPA would require then the formation of a committee that oversees the use and distribution of those funds. That's really sort of outside the purview of any of the select board and even really is it even FinCom to that matter, right?
Well, not FinCom. So they would come up with oversight and recommendations that would go through the same process as town meeting warrant articles. It would be the working that committee, the CPA committee, making recommendations similar to the select board or the planning board. It would go through that same funnel through FinCom to town meeting.
Right. Okay. Thank you for the update. Are there questions from other committee members? I see Maya has her hand up. Julie as well. Maya, go ahead.
I know that, the timing of hail doesn't work. Are there other projects that we know of now that this would benefit? Or is this the kind of program where we put the program in place and then we look for things that could potentially work?
So I don't believe there's anything that we have on the docket currently planned that would qualify. I don't know how I feel about the notion of putting it in place, looking for projects, just basically throwing an additional 1.5% tax on people's residents without having things that are clear benefits to the community. But that's part of what the discussion here is all about. Julie.
Yeah, I mean
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that's sort of where I was going, Rob, which is, I know this group is very focused on capital projects. School committee is very focused on school capital projects. And my concern with the CPA is that, and right now, given that there is no project, in mind that would qualify, it seems to be something a nice to have. I just don't know if it's a need to have, but
we certainly know we don't have any shortage of projects that we're entertaining here, right? So, Julie.
Yeah.
2 quick points. Maya, to your point, the challenge is you need a bit of a runway to actually have the money and the infrastructure set up, like Nancy said. So it will take close to 3 years almost to have the money to invest in projects. So that's the kind of chicken and egg in this scenario of, do we have projects and how much time do we have to fund them? And then just the other point I wanted to make, Nancy, the recommendation was 1.5% surcharge. For Westwood, that equates to about $250 annually. What we learned from the coalition is other communities, that's closer to about $50 annually. So, there is a bit of a delta there, not huge, dollars, but it just shows kind of working off a higher tax rate, what that means from an out-of-pocket cost for
And Julie,
residents.
just to
Thanks for
build
that,
on,
Julie.
just
Yeah.
to build on your statement as to runway, the other piece is each of those 4 buckets needs a minimum of 10%. So that means
Right.
any one of the 4, the max would be 70% that they could do, because there would still be the other 10 that would go to the other 3 categories. So,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah.
See, Chris, you had your hand raised, and then I see Melissa as well.
Thank you. Just to follow up on what Mayor was saying, so there are some projects that are part of the annual process that could be considered for CPA for review. So, for example, some of the past housing articles that the town had, if there was some open space articles. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, Nancy, the discussion with the task force, the working group, was there's not an anchor project. There's not that big project that's coming down the line that's going to work with the timing of this. So the task force the committee was looking at Hale as a potential. But as you've heard, that's just not lining up. Some of the other successes in some other communities, they've identified an anchor project that was really going to help promote the CPA. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're all facing with all the other challenges that we have.
And I want to add something just globally on the town of Westwood. We've been very successful at garnering support of important projects that the town wants that lend themselves to quality of life. I mean, certainly we've been very successful with the schools, with our municipal projects, but it's not like we're sitting there saying we're lacking in things. I would say, with the exception of enough playing fields, but I'm not sure what the capacity is for enough playing fields. And we're land restricted. So I just make that as a sidebar observation. But I also want to say, Rob, Phil's finally figured out how to raise his hand.
I see him. I see Melissa first, and then I'll be getting to Phil. Melissa,
He's
please.
been waving you down.
And I'm like Phil, I just learned how to raise my hand recently too. So, yeah, the 2 points I just wanted to add is one, there is some match from the Commonwealth as well, which I think is a value for the town, not 100% match. And that match does, Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it varies depending on the funds that year and the participants. There's a lot of communities, the coalition told us, that are going to be putting it up for ballot in the presidential election. And I'm going to put in the chat the coalition website, which has a lot of the projects that we can see that the towns have been doing, which gives some ideas of how the funds might be used in our town in a few years. Because again, it is going to be a few year wrap up, but it is that we're missing that the anchor project is the overall idea. Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, just to add on to what Melissa said, the Commonwealth, every November is when they disperse funds to those communities that are CPA communities. So in the first year, you need 1 full year before the town would receive such funding. So we would have to complete 1 year and be in the second year before we receive funding on that look back, just to make sure everyone's clear on that.
Oh, somehow
You're
everything
muted,
went
Rob.
silent. Everything went silent here. Okay,
Oh, I'm sorry. I was the one that was muted, so my
all
apologies.
right. I would suggest there's a different way to look at this. I would look at it less from how do the projects that we have on the table right now or in the next 2 or 3 years line up. I would look at it more, are there community needs or benefits in general in these 4 areas? And if we think that there are longer term, then this is sort of a savings account. And I fully admit that in trying to pass this at the ballot box, it's very helpful to say, we're going to get soccer field X or affordable housing Y. On the other hand, I personally would say we've got needs in at least 2 or 3 of these areas. And it's money that we're paying into the system that somebody else is getting right now. So it may not pay for a fire station. That may be the more immediate need. But I think if you sort of look at it with a longer and broader lens, you know, do we have open space needs? Do we have affordable housing needs? Do we have playing field needs, etc.? I think the answer to many of those things is yes. And this would give us a pool of funds from which to draw and make decisions, rather than have to, you know, put together a coalition every time something's got to be done because you need an override. So I just think if we look at ourselves and say we've got the needs, then we should consider this, because you know, whatever, Needham's using our money.
It is a fair point that, you know, I think ultimately we'll have to decide, you know, as we are looking at a number of projects that will in all likelihood require a debt exemption override to fund, whether we can also ask simultaneously to tax and create a longer term savings account. I don't disagree that, you know, there are, the point that Melissa made that you're dovetailing with is that there are additional state funds available that we are not utilizing as not having adopted this yet. You know, the question becomes how much this is part of the kitchen table conversation that this group was founded on, right? Is the idea of we have more need than we have resource, and how do we prioritize? So good discussion. Is there anybody else who has any points to make with respect to this?
Rob, if I could, I'd like to speak to Phil's comment and have a conversation with Phil here. As we're told from the coalition, as we were told, the funds that go into the trust fund, the state level funds that get distributed to communities participating in CPA, they come from registry of deed transactions, and I believe also from the state budget. And this year the state did not allocate to the CPA trust fund. So when you say we're paying into it, are you referring to the same thing as these registry of deed transactions? Because
Right.
otherwise I'm not aware of any pay-in.
Somebody buys a house in Westwood, they put the money in, and
Okay.
somebody in Needham builds a soccer field.
Okay,
Because
I just wanted to be sure
yeah.
we're talking the same
Yeah.
thing, just to give
Yeah.
everybody clarity on that.
Because the, you know, the towns, whatever, the 200 and whatever towns that are doing it get our money. You know, our citizens pay
Portion
that
of
money,
it. Yeah.
and somebody from another town gets to use it.
What's the scope of magnitude we're talking about here in terms of the funds that other towns are receiving or that we would be entitled to? Have we run those numbers? Do we know that? Do we have that information?
Well, it all starts with
How much
if
we
we were-
fund?
yeah, how much, what the rate is, and we've looked at what we could generate, and I'm just looking at the end of the memo we put together. With the exemption that a lot of communities do of the first $100,000 of property value, not having an exemption, we would generate as a community about $400,000 a year for every 0.5 percentage point. So if we did 1%, that would be 800,000. 1.5%, we'd be at 1.2 million. So that would be what we would generate locally. And what we would get in match funds all depends on, I think Melissa was mentioning this, really depends on how much is available, who's participating, how many communities. We're up to 195 municipalities, and what rate are they at. So there's a lot of, you know, ticking and tying. So think of it as something much less than 100%. So if we're at a 1% surcharge generating 800,000, it would be something much less than $800,000 more recently. And it's all dependent on the circumstances in the year. Does that answer your question?
It does. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
And we
And-
can borrow against the locally raised funds, not the matched funds from the state. So we could use it to borrow and pay the debt service annually.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
And Melissa, thank you for putting into the chat, the communitypreservation.org website. Tish, I'm just going to ask you, make sure that that link gets into the minutes from this meeting for anybody watching who's not on as a panelist. It's www.communitypreservation.org/databank. And then there's another / with a project database. So anybody who wants to go look at those types of projects can do so.
Rob, unless you guys, you and others at the long range financial planning level have any other specific work for us, our working group will go quiet.
I think that's appropriate. And then I think at a future meeting, we can take a vote from this group to make a recommendation to the select board. I think that would be probably an appropriate next step. Next, I'd like to just move to sort of existing projects and let's see. Chris, let's talk a little bit about, we were in the process of gathering estimates on everything. How do you feel about our ability to accurately do that, to give this group the appropriate amount of meat for us to have sort of some of those timing and other consideration discussions?
Oh, thank you, Rob. I think our team is doing the best job that they can do with some of the estimates. But I certainly think if you go back, I think even as far back as 2007, the town did a study where we hired professionals that came in, architects that would come in and they would assess the buildings and look at different needs and help put a plan together. I think that would be something that could benefit this group and the town as a whole. So I would certainly encourage this committee to consider something, maybe making a recommendation to the select board on something on those lines in the future. But I do think that would be beneficial.
How do others on the committee feel about something like that? Do you find that that would be significantly helpful as we're having these discussions? Keeping in mind that this is long range in nature.
I do.
Nancy, you gave us a thumbs up. Phil, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I would agree as well.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay. Chris, maybe that's something for a future select board meeting in terms of, timing and process, etc. So I'll leave that for you for a follow-up with the select board.
Okay.
All right. I think that was what we had in the way of current projects. Chris, do you want to touch at all on the firehouse in terms of next steps with respect to sort of feasibility at all?
Happy to just provide this committee with an update on where we are. The plan is to get for the select board as early as their October 11th meeting to hear a report from Dorm Whittier, a completed feasibility report. For those of you who may not be aware, we began the feasibility report looking at 3 different locations. The select board supported the recommendation for a new build at the current location. So Dorm Whittier went back and completed they're in the process of completing the feasibility report for that authorization. And the hope is to have that before the select board at their October 11th meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Any questions from committee members?
Just a comment. I want to say it's great to see that moving along.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that's a collective feeling on that one.
Mhm.
All right. Let's
Maya
move
has her hand.
to
Yeah, Rob, just
ma'am.
quick question on the firehouse. Chris, is there I know that you're still working with Dorn Whittier, but is there any sense of timing of this project when you think that any portion of it would be ready for a town vote, or what's the sense of the timing of it?
So that will be discussed with the select board after they receive the feasibility report. So not knowing what's contained in that feasibility report as of yet with some estimated costs. Once we have that conversation with the board, then I would hope that we bring it back at least at the following meeting of the select board to have that type of discussion.
Okay. And that's October, you said that Doran Whittier is delivering that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll see that on the October 11th meeting, and whether, I think it's probably our next meeting, Chris, after that's 24th. Is that right?
But leave the 23rd.
23rd. Okay, yeah. Okay. Speaking of future meetings, let's talk about the next, the reconvene for this group. I actually think, at this point, we may benefit from allowing those next two select board meetings to play out in the beginning of some of the FinCom process. And we can probably look to late October for our next meeting. So given that, as I look ahead into October, would the morning of the 24th work for this group? I know, Phil, that sometimes is a tough day for you on the Tuesday. I could look at the 24th or the morning of the 26th. So let's get a show of hands. Who would be available on Tuesday, October 24th? Okay. All right. Even Phil, that's great.
Yep.
Okay. Then let's book that Tuesday, October 24th, for at 8 a.m. for our next meeting via Zoom. With that, I'll open to any public questions, comments. You can put something in the Q&A. Okay. Seeing none, I would ask someone for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second,
Seconded.
All right, now we're going to do a roll call vote from the members that are here. Phil,
yes.
Chris. Pat, Julie Bride,
Yes.
Mayor Plotkin,
Yes.
Melissa McDonough,
Yes.
Nancy Hyde,
Yes.
and let's see, I thought I saw, is he still here? Yes, Paul Teferi.
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Thank you all for some excellent discussion this morning. Oh, and Paul McLaughlin from the side has said yes as well. So thank you all for your time this morning. Tim, welcome to the group. Good to have you here. And
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I'm sure we'll be seeing each other quite regularly going forward. So thank you all, and we will see you again on October 24th.
Thanks, Fred.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Rob.
day.